Okay. Okay. So let's get started, everybody. Thanks everybody for joining. I really appreciate this discussion that we're going to have about ethics. As the SPJ says, there is nothing more essential to journalists than relationships with their sources. And to quote from the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics, ethical journalism strives to ensure the free exchange of information that is accurate, fair, and thorough. An ethical journalist acts with integrity. I'm Michael Yoanna. I'm your moderator. I am the managing editor of the Mountain West News Bureau, and that's a collaboration of NPR affiliated public media stations in Colorado, Idaho, Wyoming, New Mexico, Utah, and Nevada. And welcome everybody to the SPJ's Ethics Week. I want to thank the SPJ Colorado Pro chapter for their role in creating this event, including Deb Hurley Brobst and Fred Brown and Mark Harden, and also Kim Suyuki. I also want to acknowledge right now that there's a breaking news story at the moment, reports of an active shooter on the Florida State University campus. The news there is just evolving, and I just want to say that I'm hoping for the best that can be possible in such a horrible situation. And certainly the journalists there covering the incident are encountering numerous ethical issues at this moment, being careful to confirm facts, not spread any misinformation, staying focused on helping people understand the response, what's happened, and how to stay safe. So on that note, we'll turn to our hour-long webinar, and we're looking at the everyday ethical issues that journalists face. And as our title says, when to say no. Here's an example. Here's an example that I made up. A billionaire says, "I will buy you an all-expense paid trip to the Bahamas if you don't write your story about the lawsuits my company is facing." Uh, that's a no. So that's a really obvious example, but as you'll see during our conversation, it gets harder in the day-to-day scenarios. Our panelists are, and panelists, please raise your hands as I introduce you. Our panelists are Tamara Banks, a former Denver TV journalist and one-time mayoral advisor, and now a freelance journalist in Atlanta. She's been on the journalism and the public information officer side of the equation. So welcome, Tamara. Erin McIntyre, publisher and editor of the Ouray County Plaindealer in Southwest Colorado. Welcome, Erin. Elliot Wenzler, Denver City Council reporter for the Denver Post. Welcome, Elliot. And Lucas Brady Woods, government and politics reporter at a station I used to work at, KUNC Public Radio. Welcome, Lucas. So, I just want to start with the more, as I was saying, routine ethical issues, the day-to-day ones that come up for most journalists. As the SPJ Code of Ethics implores, journalists are to act independently. This means avoiding conflicts of interest, even the perception of conflict, and to disclose the unavoidable ones to editors. It also means being wary of sources trying to influence you. Just kind of put a question out there for our panel. Have any of you ever been offered a gift, travel, or some other kind of perk or special treatment? And how did you handle that?
Michael,
Yeah,
I'm not sure who wants to go first. Tamara, do you
go
want to
ahead, Erin. No, go ahead.
do you mind? Okay, I have kind of a funny example. I mean, I think it's fairly routine that people don't understand that we shouldn't be accepting gifts or perks. There are situations where I've always said like a cup of coffee is fine if that's all it is, because I feel like my soul can't be purchased with a cup of coffee. I mean, but it's sort of like an everyday example, I guess. If I go out to an interview or something like that, I try to buy, and that's something the newspaper pays for in my case.
Mhm.
you know, I'm paying for it to avoid even the conflict there. But if they went ahead and bought it, I'm not going to fight them on the way to the, the credit card thing. I'm not going to wrestle somebody to the ground and be like, you can't buy that for me. That's creating more of a problem. But I do have an example of a situation where somebody asked me not to publish something, and it was so ridiculous in exchange for a trip. We report in a very small rural area up here in the San Juan Mountains in Colorado. And it's not unusual for celebrities to come and purchase tracts of land and have some sort of getaway. It's not too far away that we have, like, Oprah and Tom Cruise and whatever living up there. But recently, Tyler Perry, the actor, purchased hundreds of acres of property to kind of like form his own getaway here. And we hadn't really had a chance to prove that it was him because he was under this other company and all this stuff, but we knew it was him. And then he decided to come and bring his production company to film a movie here last winter, called Joy Ridge, where they pretended that Ouray was Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which I didn't really understand because he has a place in Jackson Hole too, but whatever. So we came here to do that. And during our reporting on that, we were going to report that, Tyler Perry has recently bought all these hundreds of acres. And he's, we don't really know what his intentions are, but that he's invested in the place here and he's spending more time here. Well, I talked to his publicist about the film, and I mentioned that we knew about this, and she's like, if you could not mention that he has a place there or he's spending time there. I mean, Mr. Perry really enjoys his privacy. And, if you could just agree to not publish that he's purchased the places there, I'm sure we could get you a spot on the junket for the film and this trip. And I'm like, what? I don't even know what that means, but no. And I just kept saying, like, well, this is public, these are public records. Anyone could go look it up. It's in the tax records. And she just kept saying, well, if you could just keep that out of the paper, we could put you on the list for the junket. And I was like, I don't know what that is. No. So anyway, we published it. It was fairly minor, but I think that's an example of a situation where we're like, yeah, no, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, just a minor mention that there's somebody living new to town and they're
Right.
buying a lot of land, right?
Right.
Regardless of whatever their status may be in Hollywood. T Tamara, you also had something to say?
Yeah, just one sort of a day-to-day sort of thing, dovetailing off of what Erin said is back in the day when I worked at WB2 News, Channel 2 News, the stations there would all receive season ski passes from the ski resorts. I don't know if you remember that, Michael, or anyone else, but I was like, and I'm here, this young, dumb kind of rookie reporter going, now how is that ethical? We have to talk about their economics, even the snow condition obviously is very political because if you get that wrong and you say it's crummy snow and nobody goes up, you're in big, trouble. So shortly after I just raised the question, that went away and I was persona non grata for a while, but it just kind of makes sense. That's sort of like the day to day. Another example that I've encountered, I cover a lot of international stories. I spend a lot of time in Sudan and South Sudan and conflict zones and East Africa. And when I went to Iraq during the war, I'm not a war correspondent, at least not then. And so I was embedded. So that we had this really deep and thoughtful conversation, I think, and research about what does being embedded mean? Does that mean that the US military not only provides their security, which thank you very much, I appreciate it, but we made sure we paid our own hotels, our own food. And it was really exhaustive research to make sure we weren't just telling, good old America is doing the great thing. It just provided a sort of a general assignment reporter an opportunity to cover stories that weren't just the body count of the day. We felt like it was worth it to tell the other sides of the stories, things that were happening in Iraq with the people, with the civilians, and not just the military, the war itself in terms of war strategy and policy.
Yeah, those are some great examples. The ski tickets makes me think. Yeah, I did an investigation into ski lift injuries, people who are injured on ski lifts. Certainly, the if I had, you know, taken part in getting free tickets, it would have felt like a conflict of interest to go down the road of telling that story. So things get complicated fast, don't they? I'd like to do a little round robin now and ask our panelists about ethical issues they've personally come across in their own work. Elliot, let's start with you. I gave everybody, we had a little conversation before the meeting, and I gave everybody a little homework, and this was the homework. An ethical issue might have come across personally recently in your work.
Yes, yeah. Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. I love the conversation so far. Just to kind of piggyback on what was just being said, I feel like I've so often you have the like, just last night I was at an event hosted by the city and there was pizza there and they were like, feel free to grab some pizza and take some home if you want and stuff like that. Like I'll kind of decide in the moment, but usually I'm like, I don't need to, necessarily eat this pizza, but it's also, kind of like Erin was saying, like a cup of coffee, things like that. I will just kind of, yeah, if it's not something super significant, like I've never had someone offer a trip or something like that. I actually think that in the city and in government in general, people seem to be a lot more savvy than they used to be with understanding what is actually an attractive offer to journalists. So I think the trickiest things I will get will be things like, well, hey, we don't want to answer all those questions right now, but if you'll wait, we'll give you an exclusive on this totally different story that sort of wraps in what you're saying, but then kind of allows them to control the narrative, if that makes sense. I hope that's not too in the weeds, but people have kind of picked up on it's easy for us to say no to a personal gain, but it gets a little bit trickier when they're offering, well, we can give you exclusive access to this, to this other thing. So that's something that I've run into. As far as a personal example, recently, I'm going to try to not get too into the details here so I don't get myself in trouble, but I was writing about a ballot initiative not too long ago that was a really contentious one. And I had written general stories about it, but was doing just kind of like a daily updating folks on, just like the latest turn of events, and only had a couple of hours to talk about this study that had come out related, and looked at the study, looked at what I was able to write about immediately, and wrote like a pretty comprehensive daily that looked at I'm hoping to not be too vague here, but looked at some of the obvious stuff that could be written about at that point, and then published. And what ended up happening is one of the sides reached out to us and they were like, well, we want you to include more information from us that makes us look good, basically. And we want you to include these studies, these other studies that we sent you, that make us look good, basically. And we did not have the time, did not have the ability to evaluate these like 6 different scientific studies that they just sent us. Those are really hard to sort through and to understand, like, well, what was the methodology of these studies? And is it something that we actually want to disperse out to our readers? And so it was actually a really tricky situation, because I was like, well, yeah, I mean, if I'd had a week or two to do an exhaustive look into this issue, maybe I would have included 1 or 2 of those, but I had a couple hours. And what they were asking is, we want you to go back into the story and add stuff after it had already been published, so it's just like, it got really hairy because there was nothing incorrect in our story. They just wanted more that would make them potentially look good. And so my favorite go-to tried and true method for saying no to sources is blaming my editor. And I would recommend that to everyone. It's the best thing to do, to just be like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't, like, my editor, they won't let me, or I'll get in trouble if I do that. And it's great to have editors, and that's kind of the job of editors, to back you up in that kind of stuff. And in this situation, that's what I did. I blamed an editor, and then they ended up reaching out to the editor, escalating it to him, and asking him to change things. And he stood by me and said, no, we're not going to make those changes just to help you guys look better.
Yeah.
And so I was glad that he backed me up.
I'm glad to see that's still alive because that's what I did, and now I'm the editor, and people are blaming me. Reporters are blaming me. But it's true. It takes a lot of work between a reporter and an editor to go through the facts of a story, and I don't think people appreciate the amount of work that you and your editor did on that story, Elliot. I mean, it's a lot of work, a lot of additional work that you're being asked to do. It seems, maybe from the point of view of your sources, like an easy ask. Oh, can you just add in this extra information? Especially in this day and age, right? Where kind of so much stuff is just thrown out on the internet without any sort of filters. It's just all out there anyway. But news organizations have a different role, and that is to vet the information and to assure that the information that they're providing is factual, checks out, and that the facts and opinions are separated and distinguished from each other in stories. So I really appreciate that story, Elliot. That's great. That's great. Lucas, turning to you, your homework, did you have an example for us?
Yeah, I have a few, and I think we've had some great examples so far, but we can also, you know, talk about how there's such a range of these things, and it's from very egregious to not. And I think Elliot was right about how, you know, in government, I cover the state capitol most of the time, and most people understand that there's not not to offer egregious bribes and things like that. But one thing that I get sometimes fairly frequently is a staffer or something will ask if they can use a photo that I've taken of their boss at a press event or a press conference or something like that. And a lot of times, the instinct at first is like, your first thought is like, oh, I'd love to help them out. Why not? But you really got to maintain that line. And it seems really mundane, but you can't, you know, be having them use your photos as a journalist as sort of their own marketing materials, and things like that. So, it may seem something very mundane, like it's just a photo that you may not even be planning on using in your piece, but still, it's your journalistic work. It's not for their marketing materials, and you just explain that, and most people are totally fine. Some other interesting examples, just a few. To sort of get away from the sort of direct give and take, right? So one thing I wanted to bring up was like, when I started my work in Colorado, I started a very small station in Southwest Colorado called KSJD in Cortez, and I had a source. I met a source out there who works in substance use treatment and stuff like that, and she was a very important source for some stories out there. Um, Fast forward to now, that same source and I have become close friends on a personal level. And she is also a very active here at the state capitol in on legislation regarding that. So I no longer use her as a quotable source because she became a friend. So that our relationship had to change. That doesn't mean she can't be very helpful to me. And we talk on background all the time, and we're friends. So we love to talk shop. We're passionate about what we do. So and things will come up in conversation that will lead me down a road that, or she can recommend other sources that she knows and things like that. So that's a different ethical question there. But there's a lot of these questions, right? I think it's not just as simple as being offered something for good coverage. I think there's as a journalist, you're constantly presented with these ethical dilemmas, and so I think it's important to bring that up. And I really value our relationship. It's almost more useful now than it was as a proper source. But it is, if you do become friends with your source, it's okay. Just understand they can't be a source in the same way. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And just to put a finer point on that, Lucas, just so I understand, you're saying that you now have a source, who's now a friend. And then that person can still tell you kind of what's going on. But now
Yeah,
you go out and independently verify.
exactly.
Basically, you treat that as a tip in a way, but that's
Exactly.
not something
And
you
even
have
as
to
like,
have
you know, it's a very complicated world that she works in, right? Substance use disorder treatment and behavioral health. The bureaucracy is really complicated. The science behind it is really complicated. The whole system is really complicated. So sometimes I just sit down with her and I'm like, can you explain how this works to me? You know, and to have that sort of just really helps me understand a lot of these things. But yes, all the reporting has to be done independently and verified, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think it's true. And people have to understand this, that journalists do have friends. Some of my friends happen to be architects. I have a strange number of friends who are architects, and I ask unusual questions about architecture to them, especially in the context of fire-wise building, which is now kind of a trend, and I kind of want to just test that information without necessarily using them as sources, but just to sort of be on that path of learning and understanding the world from beyond my own perspective, and so friends can also be helpful and informative, is what you're saying, right? Yeah, yeah. Erin, I would turn to you. An example. Do you have an example?
Sure. I have so many, but I'm going to pick a recent one with a
Sure.
story that we just published last week. So sometimes we have people ask if they can read our stories before they're published. And I don't know if the students have covered this before who are watching this, but we call it prior review, right?
Mhm.
And our policy, as it is with most, journalism outlets that follow the code of ethics, is that we don't allow prior review because it may allow um, you know, people to influence our coverage or somehow want to, manipulate it or make themselves look better. And we've talked a lot about that so far in this conversation. But this was a story where we said, no, we don't allow that. And I find most of the time when people ask that, it's because they're super excited about the story and they just want to be the first one to read it. Other times it's people who really do want to influence it, or they'd like to argue with you about what you wrote when it's factual. So anyway, but we don't allow it. But we did do something that I think is okay. And that is we agreed to read back like exact quotes that we were planning on using because this story involved a legal matter. It was complicated. It involves immigration issues. And, in order to even get an interview on the record with this woman that we found in the ICE detention facility with her and her attorney, for us to get an on the record interview, we basically were like, look, this is exactly what the story is about, and we will read back all your quotes. And if we have any questions about the technical parts of the legal process, we'll run it by you. But this is not an opportunity to change the story that we're writing. So I think, that's a good example of a situation where you have guardrails. Of course, we want to be accurate, but I would never hand over an entire story for prior review. That's just asking for trouble, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I don't know any news organizations that really do any of that. Yeah, but there are those exceptions, I guess, as you're putting it, Aaron, where maybe somebody has suffered through trauma. You have a long and winding interview with them, and then they don't remember what they said to you, and sort of for peace of mind, you give them an idea of maybe what direction is going, what things they did say that did jump out to you and are likely to be in the story. Is that what
Right.
you're? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I think also you need to use your judgment when you are dealing with people who are maybe not as media savvy as others. I mean, this woman that we've tracked down at the ICE facility, our reporter visited with her twice at the facility in interviews that were off the record. She had not agreed to be quoted at the time, but she did talk to her about what was going on there. And so it was very important for us, since she is in such a precarious situation and she is, in a traumatic state right now, for her to understand exactly what was on the record when we were able to have that interview. And that's why our reporter explained it to her and said, like, look, I'm going to ask you some things that we already talked about, but this interview is for the article, and we need to be really clear about that. So you may have told me something before, and I'm asking you about it again, and that's because I'm quoting you. So we were very, very clear about that. And I'll paste the link to that article if anybody wants to look at that later in
Yeah,
the
and
chat.
I like that example because you're also being transparent about your process as a
Right.
journalist, and I think that that's part of being ethical, especially with people who are not media savvy, who that you may be the first journalist they've ever met. So they may not understand how journalists do their work, unlike most of the people that probably Elliot and Lucas run into. They are very media savvy in the Denver City Hall. They're very media savvy down at the Colorado Capitol. They know what journalists do. They run into them all the time for years now. So I like that example. Thank you,
Sure.
Tamara. Your example.
Yes, and just quickly to underscore what Erin said, in some of the work I do a lot of talk show hosting, and most of it is live or look lives. And so people were saying, can we get a list of the questions first? And I won't do that. But since it is a live show and it is probably a 30-minute show to an hour show, I will say these are the areas we're going to discuss under this topic. So it's not a specific question, but you do want to have a lively conversation, and somebody may be thinking you're going to talk about fracking when in fact you're going to be talking about, the latest planet that was discovered or something completely different.
Yeah.
In a taped interview, you can kind of, negotiate that and have that conversation in a couple minutes. But in a live show, you want to be exactly clear about what you're talking about, but not give away everything. One of the ethical problems that I wanted to just bring up too, and I know everybody on this panel and many, if not all of the students and up and coming reporters know, is that police don't always tell the truth. So when, shocking, I know. So just because you get a press release, the police say da 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 da, it's okay to reference them as this police department says that this happened. Case in point, several years ago, I covered an accident in which late at night, after the newscast, I'm still there working. One of my photographers is out chasing breaking news. He comes in, he's got this video of a young man. We found out he was 17 years old, stolen a car. My photographer has video of Denver police and Denver paramedics kicking the crap out of him in his head and in his neck. Some of you may remember this from back in the day. Some of you may still have been in elementary school when this story came out. But what had happened was police later sent out a press release that was filled with not just errors, but flat out lies, one of which was easily proven in that the young man, yes, he stole a car, but the PIO said he was going over 90 miles an hour. He wasn't. Later forensics showed on the scene that he was going between 30 and 35 miles an hour and went through a stop sign, and a rookie police officer ended up being killed. So when you say just the mileage, the speed at which you're going, you can go from manslaughter to premeditated first-degree murder if some of these details are just flagrantly tossed out as if they don't matter. So when we say police tell us this, I think it's important to say the investigation is still ongoing. So far, however way politically you want to, politically correctly or politely, what have you say it, it is still under investigation, and not, we are moving out of that space where whatever the police say is accurate. Back in the day, that was what they said was gold because they're the police, and we know that that's not always the case. All it takes is one bad press release, one officer to lie about a case that taints it for everyone. But especially now that we've been able to see a lot of things occur in real life on camera and going viral around the world, George Floyd as an example, we know that it's okay to push back on the police department. You can do it in a very professional way. Yes, ma'am. No, sir. I would like to see some evidence. When is the forensics report coming out? When is the toxicology report coming out? And you can incorporate that into your story And it looks like you're doing your job. You're asking the questions, but you're not calling, you're not saying the police are lying. You're just saying they're still investigating the scene and you're investigating the story to make sure you come up with all the facts.
Yeah, and what's interesting in police stories, especially, is that they're sort of have a long tail to them. There's an incident that happens, and then there's so many layers of reporting and so many documents that become available along the way, and then potentially a court process. I'm wondering, just really quick, how did you handle that situation? Did that misinformation from that press release end up in some initial news accounts, and did you push back and provide the narrative that that was misinformation?
It was, at first, it wasn't necessarily misinformation, but you could just go and look and see that the skid mark didn't indicate that it was 90 miles an hour. So I continued to say that it's still under investigation. And I got so much heat from the Denver Police Department, who many of them are still friends of mine to this day. But I think it was a situation where they weren't used to having really good investigative work. And I wasn't even doing investigative work. I was just asking the question. And it's just now evolving into a time where women are being, we know that women are smarter, so my husband says. And so, but the question was, can a woman be an investigative reporter? Can she ask these questions of these male police officers, especially in leadership? And so it took a while. In fact, KOA did many reports on me and the videographer versus the story. And so I know, and my videographer, whose name I won't use, I don't have his permission, we said, we're not the story. Take a look at the tape and you'll see what the evidence. So it was quite some time before all of the truth came out. Meanwhile, everybody, as they should be, was focused on this poor officer's family, a rookie who was on just regular patrol, trying to learn his job, and he was killed. So while you have heightened emotion over officer being killed, you also have the truth sort of being pushed down to the bottom of the pile of information.
Yeah, and that's a tough place to be as journalists, I think, is to pursue, what might be an uncomfortable conclusion for some, because you're not seeking to do, to be on one side or the other. You're looking for the truth, and I think that a lot of people, it sounds like the Denver Police Department at the time, do not understand. That that is the role of journalists, that we pursue the truth. We just want, give us the facts, and we'll, give us all the facts that are possible, and we'll figure it out from there. And that can be tough because some of those facts run against the narratives that some would rather have out there publicly. I want to kind of turn to another question here, and I also want to make sure that we're being conscious here to give some time for our attendees to ask questions. But I want to ask a quick question about sort of the old paywall. News organizations rely on funding sources such as advertising, or in the nonprofit sector, there's philanthropic donations. Can each of you talk a little bit about the walls that are up in your newsrooms, and how they work to keep journalism independent of the funding sources for your news organizations? Um, Erin, you're kind of in a interesting position with that, I imagine, because you're at a very small paper. And I'm sure that you know you open the paper and you see the advertisements right next to the news story. So talk a little bit about that.
Right. Well, for those of you watching who don't know how small we are, I mean, you were talking to 1/3 of the full-time staff at our newspaper, the Ouray County Plaindealer. And as a small weekly, I mean, it's not unusual to have 3 full-time people. So I imagine there may be places with even less full-time and more part-time, but My husband and we bought the paper in 2019, and when we bought it, we were like, okay, we came from the news editorial side of the journalism business, and we were very cognizant of pressures on the newsroom from advertising. And, we had worked at other papers where advertising and news were on different floors of the building. And even that wasn't enough of a separation in some situations. We would have ad people asking us to write stories that maybe sometimes there was a nugget of news in there, maybe it was, and I appreciated the tip, but I was never going to agree to write a story because the advertising person had promised something or said, hey, they say they'll buy an ad if we can get a story in the paper. I'm like, this makes me feel so uncomfortable. And I think at a smaller operation, I don't know that there's more pressure. I feel maybe like I have a little more control because, I'm the owner. So, I've always kind of decided that news and ethics and our integrity comes first, and that people will appreciate that, and then the money will work out somehow. And so far that's been true. Even though we've made editorial decisions that resulted in people retaliating, canceling their advertising, you know, taping the quarter slot on our newspaper racks shut and putting signs on them, stealing our newspapers. We've had all kinds of things happen because we did the next right thing, which is what we always try to do. But so even in a small place, we try to keep that line very clear between editorial and advertising. And luckily, we have a part-time ad rep who's wonderful. And people will ask me about things when I'm out and about because I am the paper. Like that's just my identity here. So I'm like, oh yeah, well, cool. I'll have Kate give you a call. And then they'll keep asking me and I'll be like, yeah, I'll have Kate give you a call because I'm working on a news story right now. And I appreciate that so much, but that's her job and I'm going to let her do that. So we try to keep it very separate. I mean, not to say that we don't have people say things like, hey, I have this press release and I really want it in the paper, and can't you just publish my press release? And and then maybe I'll buy an ad. And it's like, no, I think we just heard from a very compelling example from Tamara as to why we shouldn't just take press releases and publish them word for word like they're gospel. And honestly, some of the time it is about marketing and advertising, and that's trying to convince people to take some sort of action or spend money or patronize something. And our news really needs to be fact-based and just informational where people can read it and decide for themselves. I think maintaining that firewall is really important. Even at a small publication, especially at a small publication, because it's all about trust with our readership. And if you lose that, you really don't have anything.
Yeah, yeah. And Lucas, you're in the world of public media. So the world is kind of very different than the newspapers. Public media is funded in very different ways than newspapers are, but the issues are kind of the same. Talk about how you maintain independence.
Absolutely. I think, one of the appeals to me of public media is the transparency and that's sort of involved in it. Our records of our, chief executives and their salaries are public. And so all that can be pulled up, and we're a nonprofit. So there are things around that with, our sponsors, which is essentially advertising, but there's some differences there. So at at just the base level, not to say it's better or worse, just personally, it appeals to me, and it's something that I've decided to pursue. So there's that, and we actually are two stations within one organization. So KUNC is the news station, and then the Colorado Sound is the music station. And so there's definitely separate. There's not only separation between those two stations as far as news and the work they do, but also our executive officers that are at the top. There's some very, very clear editorial boundaries between their influence on the newsroom. Our president and some of the other C-suite people, they're not involved in the newsroom at all, you know, and I think that is something that is not just true in public media, but at, you know, for-profit media as well. You know, that difference between the people who run the business and the newsroom, that is, you know, the same regardless whether it's public or for-profit.
Right, and you know, the bottom line is there are ethics. You know, I know that in addition to SPJ ethics, public media stations, including KUNC, have their own set of ethics also that they abide by, and those are centered around that idea of journalistic independence. Yeah, you know, I also kind of want to.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Sorry. There's one other thing I just wanted
yeah,
to quickly
sure.
add there is that, you know, we're an NPR affiliate. So there's also this connection between the affiliate and NPR National, right? And I think a lot of people in the public don't really understand what that means. And they kind of assume that we are the same thing as NPR, which of course we run NPR programming. We are an NPR affiliate. We're proud to be, but we do not have any financial, we pay for NPR's programming. So even that is, we don't have to follow their policies. We have our own policies. We are not reliant on them for financing. In fact, we pay them for their programming. So I think that difference is something that a lot of people in the public who aren't media savvy don't really understand too, but is an important line.
Yeah, and I think the other piece of it is that NPR takes a keen interest in what's happening locally, and sometimes those local stories are shepherded over to the national network to, you know, so that they're not just in one locality or one region. They do become national stories, and that's a good way for that network to support itself and share the journalism that's being done at its stations with the country. You know, another question, and you know, I don't necessarily know the answer to this, but I find it interesting. And Elliot, I'll toss this one to you. That some news organizations have strict ethical guidelines that prevent editors and reporters from engaging in political activities even on their personal time. So, you know, has that issue come up for you in your personal life or your work life, and in which ways has it?
Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent, when you choose to go into this line of work, you're kind of letting go of the opportunity to have those that personal connection to politics, because like you said at the top of the call, Michael, it's even the perception of bias is something that you want to avoid. So even just attending a protest, walking alongside, you know, if someone sees you there, which you can, you know, you're totally just out in the public. If someone sees you and they know that you're, you know, we're somewhat public facing people, then suddenly they have an idea of what your personal politics are, whatever that may be. And I've been accused, I think everyone here probably has been accused of being a hack for one side or the other, which, you know, is always a proud thing when you're getting accused of it from both sides. But there's also, man, I think one of the trickiest things that I talk about a lot with other reporters is voting in primaries. In Colorado, it is public record which primary you chose to vote in. So most people are going to be unaffiliated from any party, because that would obviously, for folks who may not know this, you can just go and look up what party people are affiliated with. So usually when you become a journalist, you don't want to be affiliated with a political party at all, which for a lot of people is a big deal. But even beyond that, in Colorado, you know, you're able to choose which primary you're going to vote in. And if you do vote in a primary, though, it will show that which one you voted in, which is kind of the same thing as affiliating with a party. And so I've not voted in any primaries because I don't want anyone to ever be able to look that up and you know, decide that they think I'm this type of journalist or that type of journalist. And that's, you know, that's kind of a sacrifice that I've made, and I know a lot of reporters go back and forth on if it's worth it, or, you know, now it seems like there are even more conversations about, I think the conversation is shifting of if people should just be upfront about their bias, and that kind of opens us up to a whole other thing. And I've heard that more and more, is where people are saying like, well, we should just say up front, like what we think. And so that then it's obvious, and we can't be accused as much of bias. I would say that gets tricky, because then we're human beings who change our minds too. And if you come out and say, well, this is my opinion on something, you're going to be held to that for the rest of your career. And so that is really complicated. And then suddenly it's like we're political figures, which we're not. We're not supposed to be political figures. We're supposed to be the ones that follow what they say. We're not supposed to be the story. So as much as we can eliminate ourselves from the center of the story, the better. Yeah, I think there might have been one other point I was going to make, but yeah, it's there's definitely some sacrifices. And even if you're not covering politics like me, if you're a journalist at all, it's kind of a necessary sacrifice to a certain extent.
Yeah, and I think, the thing is, you're right. I think a lot of journalists are very hesitant to arrive at a conclusion right away on something. So yeah, telling someone your opinion may not be helpful, because it could change. And a really good journalist will say, I don't know if I have enough information yet, especially on an ongoing story. I know that's me, and I know that I've frustrated many editors over the years with that exact phrase. But it's true. That's our job, is to collect as much information as possible and to continue learning, and see how issues evolve over time, and whether there are any solutions out there. So I want to give everyone a chance now to ask their questions, and I'm not quite sure how to do that, but I would like to I'd like to just have people ask their questions in the chat.
I think they're there. I think there's a few in there.
Yeah, I've got one here from Jessica. What are your organization's policies for assigning stories to freelancers whose pitches may be best partially or entirely on comped hosted experiences, like press trips, free meals, and hotel stays? I feel like that might be a good question for Tamara or Erin.
Do you want me to take it?
Sure.
My answer is no. I would never be publishing stories from someone that got stuff for free, because, I mean, there's just no way it doesn't influence the coverage. I mean, what if they got a trip to, I mean, let's say we wanted to publish a travel story, which we don't do many times. We're not that big enough, but anyway, we want to publish a travel story, and somebody accepted this awesome fancy trip to like a dude ranch or something. I mean, they're not going to write that the food sucked, or that their horse was mean, or they got bugged off, or it was unsafe, or there were bed bugs. They're not going to do it if it was for free. There's just no way. And so I just don't see a way that you can avoid that conflict if you do that. I know we're probably in the minority. I mean, I think there are publications that do accept that. And I think there are influencers everywhere online that call themselves journalists sometimes when it's convenient to get this kind of stuff. And I think we just need to be savvy enough to filter that out and realize that it's not, uninfluenced. Influencers are influenced. I think that's a fair thing to say.
Yeah. Okay. And then I've got a question from Jamie. In complicated ethical situations, is there a question we can ask ourselves, or some sort of guide to determine if it is a negative ethical choice? Does anyone want to pick that up? I'm gonna throw something in right away and say, get yourself a printable poster of the SPJ's Code of Ethics and put it up in your office, or right and look at it every day. It's one of my favorite things in the whole world. I'm going to be honest about that. It's just, it has been a beacon for me um, throughout my career, in my times as a reporter, but also my times when I did not necessarily have an editor, my 5 years of freelancing. It was very much a beacon in those days, and continues to be to this day. I quote it regularly. My favorite pieces of the SPJ Code of Ethics are number one, seek truth and report it. Minimize harm, act independently. The parts that it says about don't avoid stereotyping, all of those things are so important. Yeah. Anyone want to add to that?
I'll just jump in real quick, and I think that's the perfect answer, Michael, is yeah, definitely to always keep in mind those are really good guiding principles. Another thing though, the best thing is to have a really great editor, obviously, who you can talk to about stuff like this. But especially when you're at student newspapers or early in your career, sometimes there are editors who are also really new in their career or haven't run into some of these really sticky questions. But I think that it's important to create mentor relationships with people outside of your organization, with professors, and with people who you respect and who you think have a good ethical North Star. And like I stayed close with a lot of my professors after I left college, and I would reach out to them for both career advice and when I ran into stuff like this. I've stayed in touch with, all my favorite editors over the years, so that I can reach out to them if necessary. And it's just, I think most people who have been in this business for even a couple years or longer are really passionate about the ethical dilemmas and the questions that we face. And a lot of them are going to be, so if you email somebody, even if you don't know someone necessarily super well, if you email someone and say, hey, I saw that you've worked on a story like this before, it looks like maybe you've run into this, or even I just admire your work, I'm running into this problem, like, would you mind just kind of talking it out with me? Because so often, even just hearing yourself talk something out, and just having somebody who is in this line of work to bounce things off of can really quickly, you can be like, oh, well, obviously I need to do this. But I think it's just really important to have those relationships that can guide those decisions.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a hotline to call, ethical dilemma hotline.
Right. I would just add that if I could, Michael, that doesn't just end a couple of years after you get out of school and you're in your first or second jobs. To this day, I still, one of the first people I contacted when I started doing more international news was Christiana Amanpour. And it took her a few weeks. I thought, oh, she's never going to see this. And she did. She not only just wrote me back in a very extensive email and her thoughts and sharing her direction of what she would do, she also gave me her personal number. So you should always have somebody throughout your career that, or at least a couple of people that you can go to, as Elia put it, to be sort of your North Star and help you think through things. Because sometimes you really can't see the forest from the trees, and you may be so embedded into the story and so filled with so much information that you might be missing something. You might have a blind spot.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we have another, I think we have time for maybe one more question here. And there's one here from Jen. It's a long question. I'll try to sum it up though. You know, have you ever felt like there was a threat against you? And is it or blackmailed against you in reporting? Is it unethical to tell about the threat? Is it unethical to? So I guess that's the question. Is like, if threats ever come up in your reporting or something you have been reporting or by a source or whether it might be legal or physical even, but how do you handle that ethically? Because I think that does raise some issues.
I have a situation I can talk about with that actually. So I mean, first of all, I just want to say that safety is important for any journalist, and I don't know the circumstances that Jen's talking about here, but There are organizations out there that are focused on reporter safety and that sort of thing. So I think that's important just to mention. First of all, this was not a situation with like personal safety, but I think it's important when people threaten you while you're reporting to make that public. I think it's totally appropriate to show your readers who people are. And I think it also fosters a certain amount of trust when you're transparent about what it takes to report on certain things. So I mean, we've had situations where we've gone after stories and people didn't like them, and then at the point where someone files a lawsuit, usually against me, then somebody else takes over reporting for that, because I don't feel right about having my byline on a story that's about someone suing me about, stuff we were trying to report in the paper. So at that point, I sort of do the phone a friend thing and, either have somebody else on our staff that is acting independently to report on it, or I would bring in somebody from outside the organization, and I would include the threats in that. I mean, we did have a situation where we were reporting on, we've had an ongoing thing with the police chief here in Ouray, who's former police chief, whose house is involved in an allegation of sex assault. And in our reporting on that situation and how our city council responded to that, we came across some text messages from one of the city councilors who really didn't look very good, because she was playing one side as, texting the police chief like, "Oh, you're gonna be fine. You'll come out of this. Don't worry." And then she's texting other people being like, "He's toast," basically. So it didn't look good, but everyone had the right to know what these public officials' reactions were to the allegations that a girl was raped by multiple people in the police chief's house when he was sleeping upstairs. I mean, that's kind of important, right? And so we let the city councilor know we were going to print those text messages. She got very angry. She threatened us and threatened to pull her advertising because she's a local realtor. And we said, well, I mean, we still have to do our job. And so we did that. And then after that, she sent us a threatening note written on like personalized letterhead. And so our reaction to that was, well, let's publish the note. I mean, I guess we'll just show people who their elected officials are and what they're saying. The note she wrote in very nice cursive, "I hope your days, or may your days be numbered." That's what it was. May your days be numbered. So yeah, I think it's important to report those threats and be transparent and let people know what people are up to.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think you did draw a line there where you said if you become the subject of a legal action, then
Yeah.
all of a sudden you're part of the story, I guess, right? And
Yeah,
it's
and that's
important.
hard. I mean, that's where you have to be like, "Hey, my name can't be on this anymore." If your name is in it, it can't be on it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like, you need a little bit of separation here, and even if you have to call in somebody else, I mean, it's no different than if you needed to write a story about like a family member that got arrested, or a friend, or like Lucas was saying, like if you're friends with somebody, they can't really be a source anymore. I mean, you gotta have a little separation,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're at time, and I want to just thank our panelists. I did make a little joke about an ethics hotline, and I did not know this, but Fred Brown has shared a link. There is an actual ethics hotline at the SPJ, so check that out. The spj.org has an ethics hotline. So if you don't have if you don't have that mentor, or if that mentor of yours is not answering the phone, SPJ will be there for you. So I want to thank our panelists, Tamara Banks, Erin McIntyre, Elliot Wensler, and Lucas Brady Woods. Thank you so much for today. Really appreciated today's conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks for the honor.
Thanks for having me, and for everybody who tuned in.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.